Jacob Miller had built GrillNation from the ground up. What started as a small burger shack in downtown Denver had quickly become one of the fastest-growing fast food chains in the region, with 12 bustling locations and plans for national expansion. Known for its double-stacked burgers and bold customer-first branding, GrillNation had earned a loyal following. But recently, Jacob couldn't ignore the cracks forming beneath the glossy surface. A flood of online reviews began surfacing comments about rude staff, sluggish service, and an overall lack of warmth. At first, Jacob chalked it up to isolated incidents, but the frequency and consistency of the complaints made it clear something was off. He sat in his office rereading one particularly scathing review from a customer who said she was treated like an inconvenience rather than a guest. It stung. For years, Jacob had prided himself on creating a business that cared about its people, both employees and patrons alike. But now, filtered reports from district managers painted a much rosier picture than what customers were describing online. He knew what he had to do. Instead of launching another internal audit or anonymous employee survey, Jacob made a bold decision. He would go undercover not as a line cook or cashier, but as an ordinary customer. He wanted to see the experience from the outside. In 2 nights later, Jacob traded his tailored blazer and crisp slacks for faded jeans, a Colorado Rockies baseball cap, and a hoodie zipped to his chin. A scruffy beard and a pair of thick-rimmed glasses completed the transformation. He barely recognized himself in the mirror. More importantly, no one else would either. Most of the team members across GrillNation's locations had never met the CEO in person. With a rapid expansion pace, Jacob had relied heavily on a network of regional managers to handle daily operations. That anonymity now worked to his advantage. Jacob chose to visit one of GrillNation's busiest urban branches, a location known for its high traffic and late-night crowd. From the moment he stepped through the glass doors, he sensed something was wrong. The lobby was chaotic. Half-clean tables, littered with trays, a sticky soda spill near the drink machine, and a general air of disarray. Customers shifted in their seats, some checking their watches, others quietly venting their frustrations. One young mother was visibly flustered, trying to soothe a crying toddler, while glancing toward the counter where no one seemed in any hurry to help her. When Jacob finally reached the front of the line, the cashier barely looked up. Her name tag read, Brittany. She appeared to be in her early 20s, earbuds dangling around her neck, and wore an expression that teetered between boredom and disdain. "What can I get you?" she asked, her tone flat. "I'll have the double cheeseburger combo," Jacob said, keeping his voice low and casual. Brittany let out an audible sigh and tapped the screen with exaggerated slowness. As she handed Jacob his change, she muttered under her breath, just loud enough for him to hear, "God, I hate this job. These people don't even know how to order." Jacob's stomach turned. He took a step to the side to wait for his food and watched as Brittany rolled her eyes at a co-worker named Kyle. "If one more customer asks for extra sauce after I've already bagged their order, I swear I'm done," she snapped. Kyle gave a half-hearted chuckle, clearly uncomfortable. No one corrected her. No manager stepped in. Jacob stood still, heart pounding as the realization hit him. This wasn't just one bad night. It might be the new normal. As he clutched his receipt, he didn't just feel like a customer witnessing bad service. He felt like a founder watching the vision he built quietly unravel in front of him. As Jacob stepped aside to wait for his order, he kept his eyes fixed on the front counter, watching how Brittany interacted with both customers and co-workers. Her sour attitude didn't seem to be a momentary lapse. This was how she operated. She sighed dramatically when a customer changed their drink selection and rolled her eyes when another asked for a receipt. Her voice carried just enough for those nearby to hear snide comments. "Why do they always wait till the last second to make up their mind? And I swear some people should just eat at home." The words weren't just inappropriate, they were venomous. What struck Jacob even more than the comments themselves was the reaction, or rather the lack of one, from the staff around her. Kyle, a younger employee manning the fry station, looked like he was walking on eggshells. He moved mechanically, his shoulders tense, and his eyes flicking toward Brittany every time she spoke. When he accidentally knocked over a scoop of fries, she hissed, "Can you not?" in a tone that sliced through the kitchen noise. The look on Kyle's face was one Jacob had seen before, not from employees, but from people who felt powerless in toxic environments. He didn't talk back. He didn't defend himself. He just lowered his head and cleaned up the spill in silence. Brittany, meanwhile, laughed to herself and turned back to the register unaffected by the tension she left in her wake. Amid the chaos and subtle aggression at the front counter, something else quietly caught Jacob's attention, a small act of grace unfolding in the background. Near the corner of the dining area, an older employee named Darlene was methodically cleaning tables, wiping down surfaces with gentle focus. She moved with a calm rhythm, her expression tired but kind. She wore a faded name tag and comfortable sneakers, and despite the noise and energy of the evening rush, she carried herself like someone who had long since learned how to weather the storm. She didn't look for recognition or praise, she simply worked. Darlene's care wasn't limited to the tables. She noticed the same mother Jacob had seen earlier, the one still trying to calm her toddler whose order had yet to arrive. Without being asked, Darlene approached with a warm smile and a damp cloth to clean the sticky table. She crouched gently to the child's level and made a soft joke that caused the toddler to giggle. Then, seeing the mother's hands full, she offered to carry the tray once the order was ready. "Thank you so much," the mother said, visibly relieved. "No problem at all, sweetie." Darlene replied, her voice soft but sincere. It was the first time Jacob saw someone truly make a customer feel welcome that night. Jacob's gaze followed Darlene as she returned to her tasks. In a room filled with exhaustion, complaints, and apathy, she was a quiet force of dignity. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't challenge anyone. She just helped. And yet it was her that customers noticed, the kind smile, the willingness to go above and beyond, the way she made them feel like people instead of problems. It was everything GrillNation was supposed to represent, and it was all happening in the shadow of someone like Brittany, who had become the face of the counter. The contrast was painful. As Jacob finally collected his meal and found a seat in the far corner of the restaurant, he couldn't stop thinking about what he'd seen. Brittany's behavior had been shocking. Yes, but it was Darlene who left the deeper impression. In just a few minutes, she had demonstrated more of the company's core values than any marketing campaign ever could. The realization hit hard. GrillNation didn't need more slogans or performance metrics. It needed more people like Darlene and fewer like Brittany. Jacob took a slow bite of his burger, eyes still scanning the floor, wondering how many other Darlenes were out there, and how many of them had already walked away. The following morning, Jacob Miller headed out before sunrise, steering his car toward one of GrillNation's older suburban branches, a smaller, steadier location that had been around since the early days of the company. He parked a few blocks away, tugged his cap lower over his forehead, and slipped inside unnoticed. Unlike the chaos he'd experienced the night before, this lobby was spotless. Tables were clean, the floors freshly mopped, and the air even carried the faint scent of brewed coffee. But something about the energy felt off. There was no warmth, no chatter, no lightness in the air. Employees moved quickly but cautiously, like people bracing for something. Jacob scanned the room and decided to order breakfast and sit down. Behind the counter, a tall, wiry man barked orders with the tone of a drill sergeant. His name tag read, Rick Dawson, store manager. He didn't just lead, he ruled. "Pick it up." "People," he shouted, "we're not running a daycare." A teenage girl behind the prep station, her name tag read. Lindsay fumbled with a breakfast burrito, her hands trembling as she tried to wrap it quickly. "Seriously?" Rick snapped his voice loud enough for customers to hear. "Even my grandma could rap faster than that." Lindsay flinched but said nothing. She didn't defend herself. She didn't ask for help. She just tried harder, clearly afraid of what would come next. Jacob took his seat near the counter and sipped his coffee, slowly observing in silence. The interactions weren't just tense, they were toxic. Rick moved from one station to the next, pointing out every flaw, raising his voice with every mistake, and offering no words of encouragement. Customers could hear every insult. A group of college students waiting near the pickup station exchanged uncomfortable glances. One whispered something to another and nodded toward the door, visibly debating whether to stay or leave. And still Rick continued muttering under his breath about useless kids and rookie mistakes, as though his staff weren't within earshot. But amidst the sharp orders and heavy atmosphere, Jacob's eyes were drawn to one employee who seemed to rise above it all. A young man named Ethan worked the dining area and front counter like a true professional. He moved with quiet confidence, greeted every guest with a genuine smile, and anticipated needs before anyone had to ask. When an elderly woman came in looking confused by the menu, Ethan stepped out from behind the counter to gently walk her through her options, even suggesting items based on her dietary preferences. He handed her a tray with both hands and carried it to her table, offering a respectful, "Enjoy your breakfast, ma'am." Jacob watched the scene unfold deeply, moved by the contrast. While Rick hovered in the background with his arms crossed and a permanent scowl on his face, Ethan embodied everything GrillNation was meant to stand for. He was efficient without being cold, polite without being robotic. More importantly, he made customers feel welcome. It didn't go unnoticed. The elderly woman beamed and thanked him, and another customer leaned over to whisper, "That young man's the only reason I keep coming back here." Ethan smiled and nodded, not looking for praise, just doing his job with quiet pride. As Jacob finished his sandwich, Rick's voice once again cut through the dining area. "Lindsay, stop chatting and get back to the fryer. You're not being paid to make friends." Lindsay had simply been wiping down a table and offering a quick smile to a customer. The scolding was unnecessary and humiliating. Jacob's jaw clenched. He knew then that this wasn't an isolated moment. It was a pattern. Rick's leadership wasn't strict. It was abusive. And that meant GrillNation had more than a performance issue. It had a culture issue, one that Jacob could no longer ignore. He rose from his seat and tossed his trash, but he wasn't going far. The time had come to step in. Not as a customer, but as the man responsible for this company's future. Jacob didn't leave the store right away. After stepping out, he walked down the block, pulled out his phone, and made a call he'd been holding off on since the moment he decided to go undercover. "Tamara, it's Jacob," he said, his voice measured but tight. "I need you at the suburban branch as soon as you can get here. We have a serious problem." Tamara Walters, the regional manager overseeing several GrillNation locations, had always been reliable, smart, even-tempered, and fiercely loyal to the company's mission. She didn't ask for details. "Give me 20 minutes, she replied before hanging up. Jacob stood on the corner, watching cars pass and thinking through every word he'd heard inside the restaurant. This wasn't about one bad day or one abrasive manager. This was about leadership failure, and it was his responsibility to fix it. When Tamara arrived, Jacob wasted no time. They sat in his car, parked across the street, and he walked her through everything. Rick's bullying tone, the public humiliation of Lindsay, and the incredible professionalism shown by Ethan despite it all. Tamara's expression darkened as he spoke. "You know, this isn't the first complaint I've heard about Rick," she admitted. "But his store has always had decent numbers, so we never pushed too hard." Jacob shook his head. "Numbers don't mean a thing. If we're bleeding out the people who keep this place alive, we've clearly been looking at the wrong metrics." He looked Tamara in the eye. "Today we change that, but I'm not going in undercover anymore." Moments later, the two of them entered the restaurant. This time, through the front doors, with purpose, Jacob removed his cap and glasses. Several heads turned, but it was Rick who froze first. The confident bark in his voice vanished as recognition dawned on his face. "Sir, I didn't know you were visiting today." Rick stammered. Jacob didn't reply. Instead, he turned to the gathered employees. "Hi, everyone. My name is Jacob Miller, and I'm the CEO of GrillNation." A hush fell over the room. Even customers seemed to pause mid-bite. Jacob gestured toward the break room. "Can I have just a few minutes of your time, all of you?" The team followed, exchanging nervous glances as they filed in. Inside the break room, Jacob stood before the group, while Tamara took notes from the corner. "I've spent the past few days visiting our stores as a regular customer," he began. "What I've seen has been both eye-opening and disappointing, and I'm here to listen to you uncensored." There was hesitation at first until Lindsay, her voice barely above a whisper, shared her experience. She spoke of being yelled at in front of customers, of feeling worthless after every shift, and of co-workers quitting within weeks because of the constant tension. Ethan spoke next. Calm and composed, he explained how difficult it was to remain motivated when management seemed to thrive on fear. One by one, others nodded, some speaking up, some simply nodding in agreement. Rick, seated in the corner with crossed arms, remained silent. Once the room quieted, Jacob turned to Rick. "It's clear that your leadership has caused harm, not just to morale, but to the values this company was built on. And for that reason, Rick, you're being let go, effective immediately." Rick's face drained of color. "Sir, I was just trying to run a tight ship," he said weakly. Jacob didn't raise his voice. "There's a difference between structure and intimidation, and what's happened here is not acceptable." Rick gathered his things and left without another word. When the door shut behind him, the room seemed to exhale. Jacob turned back to the team. "I'm sorry it took me this long to see what was happening. That ends today." He looked directly at Ethan. "Your kindness, professionalism, and steady hand have not gone unnoticed. I'd like to offer you the position of team lead here, effective immediately and with a raise to match." Ethan blinked, then nodded slowly, the weight of the moment sinking in. "Thank you, sir. I'll do my best." Jacob smiled. "I know you will." Then he turned to Lindsay. "What you've endured is unacceptable. Starting today, we'll adjust your schedule to better suit your needs, and Tamara will be checking in personally to make sure you have the support you deserve." For the first time that day, Lindsay smiled, not the nervous kind, but the real one. A few other employees clapped quietly, a ripple of hope finally cutting through the fog. Jacob nodded once more, the conviction in his voice unshaken. "This is just the beginning. From here on out, we rebuild together." Jacob Miller returned to GrillNation's headquarters that evening with more than just exhaustion in his eyes. He carried something heavier truth. He didn't stop at his office. Instead, he walked straight into the boardroom with a thick folder in hand, its contents filled with handwritten notes from his undercover visits. It was already past office hours, but he called an emergency all-hands meeting with his senior leadership team, regional managers, and HR department. As they gathered, murmuring quietly, unsure of what was about to unfold, Jacob stood at the head of the table, calm but resolute. "We've been so focused on growth," he began, "that we stopped paying attention to what's happening on the ground. That's on me. But starting today, that changes." He opened the folder and began sharing first-hand accounts. He told them about Brittany, the cashier who muttered insults at customers and how no one intervened, about Rick Dawson, the manager who ruled through intimidation, and how he humiliated Lindsay daily, and about the people like Darlene, Ethan, and Carlos, employees who quietly upheld the company's values despite toxic conditions. The room grew still. Faces shifted from confusion to concern. Some lowered their eyes. Others sat straighter in their chairs, realizing the depth of disconnect between leadership and reality. Jacob didn't sugarcoat anything. "These aren't isolated incidents. These are warning signs. And if we don't fix this now, GrillNation won't just lose good workers, we'll lose our soul." Turning to Tamara, who sat quietly near the front, Jacob gave his first clear directive. "You're visiting every store in your region this month," he said, "not to audit, not to observe, but to talk. Listen, ask employees what they need, what's working and what isn't, and don't take surface-level answers. I want honesty, even if it's hard to hear." Tamara nodded, her face already reflecting the weight of the task. She had seen the same cracks Jacob had, and now she was being asked to help mend them. "We can't rely on numbers alone anymore," he continued. We need to understand the experience, because that's what defines our culture. Then Jacob turned to the full group. Effective immediately, we're launching a company-wide leadership training program. Every store manager, assistant manager, and shift lead will attend, no exceptions. And this won't be about how to hit your numbers faster. It'll be about how to lead with empathy, build trust, and treat every team member with respect. A murmur ran through the room, some surprised, some relieved. For years, the focus had been on speed output and efficiency, but Jacob was drawing a new line in the sand. Because hitting targets means nothing if we destroy people along the way. We're not just flipping burgers, we're shaping futures. As he spoke, Jacob didn't shy away from placing blame where it belonged, squarely on himself. I let the pressure to expand pull me away from what mattered most: our people, and it took going undercover for me to see just how far we'd drifted. But I've seen enough now to know this isn't a quick fix. It's a rebuild. He paused, scanning the room. The good news: we have people worth rebuilding, for people like Ethan who stepped up when others shut down, like Darlene who cared when no one else did, and Carlos who led from behind the grill without needing a title. We're going to honor that by creating a culture where leadership is earned through service, not control. By the end of the meeting, the mood had shifted. The same leaders who once measured success by performance metrics were now being asked to lead by presence, by listening, by empathy. Jacob closed the folder and placed it on the table. This isn't a pivot, it's a promise. One I intend to keep. We're starting over. Not from scratch, but from heart, because when you lose sight of the people who make your company possible, you lose everything. We're not going to let that happen again. As the room fell into quiet reflection, Jacob stepped out into the night, not as a CEO chasing expansion, but as a leader ready to rebuild from the inside out. Jacob Miller pulled into the parking lot of one of GrillNation's newest locations just as the dinner rush was starting to build. The store had been open for less than a year, but already had a reputation for high staff turnover. Reviews spoke of slow service, cold food, and a team that seemed constantly overwhelmed. Jacob adjusted his hoodie, tucked his notepad into his pocket, and walked inside. The restaurant was brightly lit and immaculately clean, at least on the surface, but almost immediately he could sense the absence of something deeper. There was no laughter, no chatter between co-workers, no greetings for customers beyond the bare minimum. Everything felt transactional, robotic, and numb. The energy wasn't tense, it was flat, like the staff were just going through the motions, doing the job without heart. At the front counter, a young man named Brandon was working the register. His shoulders were slouched, his voice monotone, and he never made eye contact. Next, he called out, barely glancing at the customer in front of him. When a middle-aged woman politely asked if she could substitute a salad for fries, Brandon didn't hesitate. "No substitutions," he replied, already ringing up the next item. "But I've done it before," the woman said, confused. Brandon shrugged without looking up. "Not my problem." The woman frowned and stepped aside, visibly frustrated. Jacob watched from the side, noting the exchange in silence. It wasn't just bad service, it was indifference, the kind that sent loyal customers running and killed team morale from the inside out. As the line grew longer, Brandon became more impatient. He sighed audibly when customers took too long to decide, muttered sarcastic comments under his breath, and groaned when a father with 2 young children hesitated on their order. "Can you hurry it up? There's a line," he snapped. The father, flushed with embarrassment, mumbled something quickly and stepped aside. Jacob's jaw clenched. He stepped in to say something, but stopped himself. Not yet. He wasn't finished observing. Instead, he ordered a grilled chicken sandwich, took his receipt, and moved to a corner booth with a clear view of the entire restaurant. That's when he noticed something different, something worth pausing for. In the back of the kitchen, working quietly and efficiently, was an older man with salt and pepper hair and steady hands. His name tag read, Carlos. Jacob watched him juggle 2 stations, flipping burgers and assembling orders without breaking stride. When the fryer beeped, Carlos was already there. When a new hire struggled with wrapping a sandwich, Carlos stepped in with a reassuring tone. "You're doing fine," he said gently, guiding the younger worker's hands. "Just tuck the edges tighter. You've got it." The trainee nodded visibly, more confident, and got back to work. Carlos wasn't loud, and he didn't carry a title, but it was obvious he was the one holding that kitchen together. Throughout the evening, Carlos continued to move like a quiet force, never rushed, never flustered. He handled orders, coached his team, and kept the line moving with calm professionalism. When a young girl spilled her drink near the pickup station, Carlos emerged with paper towels before anyone could ask, crouched down, cleaned the mess, and smiled at the girl as she whispered a shy thank you. "No worries," he replied warmly. Meanwhile, Brandon's behavior continued to deteriorate. He huffed when asked questions, rolled his eyes at special requests, and eventually began complaining aloud. "They wonder why we're short-staffed. Maybe if they paid us more and actually cared, we wouldn't all be quitting." It was a sentiment that hit Jacob hard, not because it excused Brandon's behavior, but because it revealed something deeper frustration left to rot. As the dinner crowd thinned out, Jacob finally stood up and approached the drink station where Carlos was wiping down trays. "Carlos," he said, offering a hand, "you've been doing an incredible job tonight. I've been watching." Carlos looked up a little surprised, "Just trying to keep things running," he said modestly. Jacob smiled. "You're doing more than that. You're leading, even if you're not wearing a manager's badge. How long have you been with GrillNation?" "6 months," Carlos replied. "I've worked in restaurants most of my life. Thought this job might be slower, but turns out it keeps me busy." Jacob nodded. "Well, I want you to know your efforts haven't gone unnoticed. You've got a gift for mentoring, and I intend to make sure more people learn from you." Carlos blinked, then smiled. "Thank you. That means a lot." Jacob left that store with a new name added to his growing list. Carlos, another unsung hero, quietly carrying the heart of the company while the noise drowned out the best of it. The morning after his third undercover visit, Jacob Miller walked into GrillNation's headquarters with a different kind of urgency. He didn't stop by his office or ask his assistant to schedule a meeting. He went straight to the boardroom, placed a stack of handwritten notes and observations on the center table, and called an immediate meeting with the senior leadership team. His voice carried more than authority. It carried clarity. "We can't wait any longer," he said plainly. "The culture we thought we had no longer exists in too many of our stores. It's time to rebuild, not just with policies, but with purpose." Around the table, executives leaned forward, sensing a shift was coming, not just in operations, but in identity. Jacob outlined 3 major reforms that would begin immediately. No delays, no red tape. The first was the launch of an anonymous employee feedback system, a direct channel for team members across all locations to report concerns, ideas, and workplace issues without fear of retaliation. "If we want honesty," Jacob said, "we need to remove the fear of consequences. I want to know what's really happening out there, even if it's hard to hear." He tasked HR with building the platform within 2 weeks and personally committed to reviewing summaries from each region. "Silence has been our enemy," he added, "and this is how we start breaking it." Next, Jacob introduced a mandatory leadership training initiative. It would be rolled out across every store, tailored not just around operational success, but emotional intelligence, empathy, and conflict resolution. "Leadership isn't about who yells the loudest," he said. "It's about who listens, who empowers, and who sets the tone for the team." No manager, assistant manager, or shift lead would be exempt. Those unwilling to complete or embrace the training would be reassigned or removed. It was a bold step, but one Jacob believed was necessary. Our success has never depended on how many burgers we sell. He reminded them, but on how our people feel when they're here. The third reform struck a different chord, one rooted in gratitude. Jacob announced the creation of the GrillNation Heart Award, a recognition program for employees who consistently embodied the company's core values. The first honorees would be Darlene, Ethan, and Carlos, 3 individuals, who had no idea the CEO had been watching them, but who through their quiet consistency had carried the spirit of the company on their backs. Their photos would be featured in every break room across all locations with a short story highlighting why they were chosen. Recognition isn't just a bonus. Jacob said it's a mirror. When our team sees the kind of behavior we admire, they reflect it. After outlining the reforms, Jacob didn't stop there. He made a personal promise, one that surprised even his closest staff. Over the next 3 months, he said, I will visit every single GrillNation location myself. No disguises, no pre-announced visits. I want to talk to our teams. I want to hear their stories. I want to look them in the eye and say, you matter here. The room was silent, not out of doubt, but out of respect. Jacob had always been a visionary leader, but this was something different. This was a man choosing humility over hierarchy. And for the first time in months, the team felt a renewed sense of purpose. As the meeting wrapped, several department heads approached Jacob quietly, expressing support. This was long overdue, one admitted. Thank you for leading this from the front. Jacob simply nodded. He didn't want applause, he wanted action. That night, as he sat alone in his office, reviewing site reports and preparing the rollout communications, he glanced over at a framed photo of GrillNation's original 5 employees, taken back when the company was still one small burger joint with a big dream. We lost our way, he whispered to the photo, but we're coming back, and this time we'll get it right together. 2 weeks after the reforms were announced, GrillNation began to shift, not with fireworks or sweeping headlines, but in small, meaningful ways that only those on the inside could feel. Jacob Miller kept his word, visiting stores unannounced, not to inspect, but to listen. And in each place he visited, he saw early signs that change was taking root. In the suburban branch where Rick Dawson had once ruled with fear, the atmosphere was different. Lighter. More open, and at the heart of it all was Ethan, now wearing a crisp new badge that read, Team Lead. He moved with confidence and kindness, checking in with team members, greeting customers by name, and stepping in wherever needed, not as a boss, but as a guide. Ethan's transformation wasn't sudden. It was earned. He took time each day to coach his teammates, especially the newer ones still finding their rhythm. He asked for feedback after every shift, implemented small changes to make life easier on the team, and even created a rotating recognition board in the break room to highlight someone's contribution. Each week, customers began leaving positive reviews again. Many calling Ethan by name. That young man in the green apron makes this place feel like home. One customer wrote, for Jacob, it was all the proof he needed that leadership, when rooted in respect, creates ripple effects that data can't always capture. Back at the city branch, where Darlene had quietly carried the store's spirit for years, the changes were more than symbolic. Jacob returned to visit her in person, this time as himself. When he found her wiping down a table with the same quiet care as always, he smiled and sat beside her. Darlene, he said, you've been the heart of this store for longer than anyone realized. We just didn't say it enough. He handed her a formal letter recognizing her as one of the inaugural recipients of the GrillNation Heart Award. Along with the letter came a raise, additional paid time off, and a commitment no more double shifts unless she volunteered. Darlene blinked away tears. Thank you, Mr. Miller. I wasn't sure anyone saw. We see you now, he replied gently, and we're going to keep seeing you. Perhaps the biggest surprise came from the third store, where Brandon, the disinterested cashier who once treated customers like a burden, was still employed. After Jacob's last visit, Brandon had been placed on a 60-day probationary period with clear expectations for change. He was assigned a new shift supervisor and required to complete GrillNation's new respectful leadership module, even though he wasn't in a management position. Initially, he resisted, but over time, something began to shift. One of his co-workers, a trainee he had once ignored, approached him after a busy night and said, Hey, thanks for helping me fix that order today. You didn't have to, but you did. Brandon didn't know how to respond at first. Then he nodded. Yeah, no problem. Over the next few weeks, Brandon started showing up earlier. He restocked the drink station without being asked. He started looking customers in the eye. He even once offered a sincere, "Have a great night" to a regular who usually avoided his line. The change wasn't dramatic, but it was real, and Jacob noticed on his second follow-up visit he pulled Brandon aside. "I see the effort," he said, "and I want you to know it matters. You're not just here to survive your shift. You have a chance to grow if you choose it." Brandon nodded slower this time. "I'm trying, sir. I really am." It wasn't redemption. Not yet, but it was a beginning. As the first month of reforms came to a close, Jacob gathered with the leadership team to review the rollout. Metrics had started to shift. Employee satisfaction, surveys showed improvement, customer complaints dropped slightly, and internal referrals increased. But the biggest victories weren't on spreadsheets. They were in people like Ethan, who had stepped into his potential, Darlene, who finally felt seen, Carlos, whose steady mentorship was now being scaled company-wide, and even Brandon, whose guarded frustration had begun to melt under the weight of real accountability and support. This, Jacob said at the end of the meeting, is what rebuilding looks like. One person, one story at a time. 3 months had passed since Jacob Miller walked into a GrillNation store disguised as a customer and saw the cracks in his company's foundation. Now, on a bright spring afternoon, he stood before a crowd of employees gathered at the company's first ever GrillNation Together Summit, an event he had personally organized to bring team members from every store in the region under one roof. The venue wasn't flashy, but it was honest. Folding chairs lined the community center. Banners hung with handwritten employee quotes, and trays of food came from GrillNation kitchens. There were no suits, no buzzwords, just people. Line cooks, cashiers, shift, leads, store managers and trainers filled the room, many meeting each other for the first time. The mood, lively, proud, and full of something Jacob hadn't seen in a while: hope. When Jacob stepped onto the small stage, the applause was immediate and heartfelt. He looked out over the room and saw familiar faces. Ethan smiling from the second row, Darlene seated quietly near the back with a cup of coffee in hand, and Carlos already deep in conversation with two new hires. Even Brandon was there, seated a few rows in, listening intently. Jacob cleared his throat and the room quieted. 3 months ago, he began. I realized we had a problem. Not a performance issue, not a numbers issue, a people issue. Somewhere along the way, we stopped listening. We stopped seeing each other, but thanks to all of you, we've started to change that. He went on to share the impact of the reforms, not just in policies, but in outcomes. Employee satisfaction scores were at the highest levels since GrillNation's founding. Customer complaints had dropped by nearly 40%, and repeat business was up across the board. More importantly, internal surveys showed a rise in team morale, trust in leadership, and willingness to stay with the company long term. But numbers aren't what I'm most proud of. Jacob said, his voice steady. It's the stories. The managers who now coach instead of command, the teammates who support instead of compete, and the customers who feel the difference the moment they walk through our doors. Jacob then invited a few employees to share their own reflections. Ethan spoke first, recalling how nervous he was the day Jacob promoted him and how the trust placed in him changed the way he saw himself. It wasn't just a raise, Ethan said. It was someone believing in me. Darlene, with a small smile, stood and said, I didn't think I needed recognition. I've always just done my job, but now I realize we all need to feel seen. And now I do. Carlos received a standing ovation when he shared how mentoring others had reignited his passion for the restaurant business. We're not just flipping burgers, he said. We're building each other up. And even Brandon, quietly and a bit awkwardly, spoke of how accountability and support helped him reset his path. As the final stories faded into applause, Jacob stepped forward again. What we've started here isn't a campaign, it's a commitment, a promise to never again let speed come before substance, growth before grace, numbers before names. He paused, his voice carrying through the room with quiet certainty. From now on, I will stay connected. Not from a corner office, but from your stores, your break rooms, your conversations. I'll keep visiting, keep listening, keep learning. Because GrillNation is only as strong as the people who make it what it is, and together, we're stronger than ever. The room stood in unison, not because they were told to, but because they wanted to. It wasn't applause for a boss. It was appreciation for a partner. As the event came to a close, employees lingered sharing stories, exchanging numbers and laughing over shared challenges and unexpected friendships. The summit had done more than celebrate progress. It had cemented a shift. GrillNation was no longer just a place to work. It was becoming a place to grow. And Jacob, watching from the side of the room, felt something rare: peace. Not because everything was perfect, but because for the first time in a long time, everything was honest. He looked toward the future, not with anxiety, but with purpose. Whatever challenges came next, he knew one thing for sure: they would face them together. If this story moved, you don't forget to support our mission by subscribing to Deep Inside HQ. Every week, we bring you powerful stories about leadership, empathy, and transformation. Real people, real impact. Join the community by hitting that subscribe button, sharing this video with someone who believes in meaningful change, and leaving a comment about the moment that resonated most with you. Let's keep the conversation going and keep building a better world, one story at a time.